Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio. Hello and happy Friday. I'm Holly Fry.
And I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
We talked about Ouija boards a whole lot this week.
We did.
There are so many side streets that I had to pare down, even in this narrowed focus, some of which I wanted to talk about. One thing that I think is interesting is that some historians will note some of the licensing deals that Ouija made early on that were not to make boards, but to make other things like jewelry. And there was even a Ouija oil, which was kind of a snake oil situation. Like, this is a liniment you can put on anything. But I have to laugh because there's more Ouija stuff on the market now than there ever has been.
Yeah.
And I own it all. I mean,
you're wearing a Ouija shirt right now.
Yeah, I don't think this one's licensed, but yeah, I mean, I literally have like three or four different cardigans that have Ouija boards on them. I have a million shirts. I have dresses. I have purses. I have like compacts. I love them. Like, I love the iconography of it, and I think it's very fun. And I love that it's a game that has become associated with the supernatural. That just tickles me. But it just strikes me as funny, and I wonder what any of these men involved would think if it was like, yes, now we're making a Ouija version of, I don't know, some cereal. Like, there are so many weird things floating around in the world that have Ouija branding on them now. Which is fine by me. I love weird novelty stuff, so that's right up my alley, but it does tickle me. I would love to get an antique bottle of Ouija oil, but I think they're probably hard to come by.
Probably.
There are so many things about the folds that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
One is that William Fuld was not only working for Kennard and then Ouija Novelty and then his own company. He was also, because of his association with Colonel Bowie, he also got a job in customs. So he was also making money that way. He ended up running for political office a couple of times. Like, he had a whole thing. He was working in customs until just a few years before he died. He finally retired from that job in 1924. So, like, even though he was a millionaire at that point, theoretically, if the reports are correct, he didn't really need to keep that job and did, which I'm like, how lucrative was that job? Because to me, that doesn't sound like a
right,
a big job, but apparently it might have been. I did not get into the fact that the five men who started Kennard Novelty, like, if you tried to make a chart of how they were all connected to one another, you would have to draw so many weird lines that you would end up with like a white circle, I think. Because like, in some cases, like, their children married the other one, and like this one's sister was actually working with this one, and like, but one of the weird things, it's not really weird, but it's interesting. I mean, clearly the key relationship there was this one between Colonel Washington Bowie and William Fuld. And that carried on generationally, where even Washington Bowie Jr. was William's attorney in every single case involving the Ouija board that he called. Yeah, and his son, so Colonel Bowie's grandson, had mentioned in an account that they would sit the children down, him and his siblings, and give them toy catalogs and ask them to circle any talking boards that might be infringing on patents, and then they would go after them. So they were outsourcing their searches for unlicensed Ouija boards to their kids, because kids love to look through toy catalogs, which is
sure.
I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I'm like, this is an ingenious way to get a lot of information tackled with minds that are very obsessive anyway, which are kids looking at toys. And on the other hand, I'm like, that's child labor. But apparently, Washington Bowie Jr., the lawyer, never took any payment for any of his cases that he did with Fuld. I don't know why Bowie took such a shine to Fuld. I don't understand how that relationship started and how. I mean, he clearly basically, like, at some point had decided, I'm going to make this man successful because he did.
Mm-hmm.
It's just fascinating. There is a whole side story about the Folds that I didn't get into because it doesn't make any sense in the Ouija story, and it's quite tragic, which is that but it struck me, it showed up in a newspaper article I was looking at about a whole different aspect of it, and it is about William's sister, Henrietta. We said he was one of 10 kids. He was the third in the birth order. But his sister, Henrietta, showed up in a random search I was doing as a missing person.
Oh.
And it's a really sad story because it becomes pretty apparent that this was something that was really a scenario. Her body was eventually found. She had been drowned. It was ruled a death by suicide. And it clearly, to me, again, I'm not a doctor, obviously, and I'm making judgments based on the information in old newspaper articles, but it seemed very clearly, if you look at the flowchart of information, that she had a really bad case of postpartum depression.
Oh, no.
Like, they talked about, one of the doctors when she first disappeared was like, well, I'm very worried because she seems to have had a mental break from too much nursing, which is a weird way that they would put it when they don't really understand the, mental things going on. But it makes me so sad. And it's one of those things that doesn't come up in this story a lot, but like, she was part of a prominent family at that point, and it was, barely discussed that like this was a real thing. So she becomes emblematic to me of like a problem socially where we didn't understand postpartum depression at all. I think a lot of people still don't understand it as a very real thing that needs to be addressed and treated. And so Henrietta, if you're out there, if there are spirits and ghosts, I hope you understand that, like, I see you. I am so sorry that happened to you. She's emblematic of a bigger problem. Okay, in funnier things. One, you can email us if you want, but if you are thinking, you didn't mention Mrs. Pearl Curran and the literary figure of Patience Worth that she channeled to write books, listen, I'm saving that for next year. It's coming, probably next year. The other thing is that in 1930, there was an attempt to invent an electric version of the mystifying oracle that would, like, send out electric shocks when you made connections to things. You can see why this never took off.
Yeah, that doesn't sound pleasant to me at all.
It sounds really dangerous. So, the robot that I said I would talk about.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to explain. And I should say before this, I have not asked you in any of this if you have ever played with a Ouija board and as a kid you were ever like, ooh, something's moving the board.
No, because I was raised by a very Methodist mother during Satanic Panic era.
I always have this moment where, like, my brain is like, so, because we were clearly such different children where my parents would tell me a thing and I would just kind of flip them the bird and run and do my own thing. Whereas you were a very good kid, I think.
Yeah, in a lot of ways I was. Like, I was a rule follower in a lot of ways, but not when it came to things like doing my homework. I thought that was a waste of my time, so I just didn't. But we were also living, like, in a community where a lot of people have the same perceptions. So, like, I don't know if any child whose house I played with had a Ouija board there. Yeah.
Yes. My family loved a little mysticism. Loved it. I should say my mom's side. But in any case, the robot. And I only ask you that because I'm curious if you had ever had that experience of feeling like the board had moved or the planchette had moved and that clearly no one involved was doing it. The thing with the robot is interesting. So these researchers in Vancouver, initially one of the things that they were doing was they were using a robot and telling the participants, okay, this robot is actually like sort of being informed by the behaviors of another person that's outside of this as a way to say, like, this is how we're controlling it and making sure no one is messing with it except for you. They had some problems with that. And they even mentioned in their paper, like, we could not scale that because it was just too problematic. The robot was problematic, which is why they started introducing having a second participant that would not do anything. And in some cases, they even had the people that were answering the questions blindfolded, and then the other participant would actually not be touching the planchette at all.
Oh.
So they could be 100% sure that like nobody was actually interfering with it, which is pretty interesting. And then people were still getting that higher 65% hit rate on their answers to trivia questions, essentially, which is just a fascinating thing. One of the things I didn't dig into because it would have taken me down on a fairly arduous and time-consuming journey is that because of that study, there have been other scientists that have started to examine this idea of idiopathic motor response and accessing knowledge you don't realize you have in some pretty interesting real-world cases. Like, could we use this to help people with Alzheimer's kind of reconnect to parts of their mind that they don't consciously access anymore? Like, there's some very interesting research going on in that space, and I just didn't want to like half-heartedly touch on that much when like I feel like I would have needed to do several weeks study of just how that was all working. If you have heard of that and you're like, well, why didn't that come up? That's why. And I don't want to do a sloppy version of it, but it's pretty interesting stuff, and you can find it online, especially if you have access to like medical journals. There's a lot of information. Like I said, I own a lot of Ouija stuff.
Yeah.
I love it.
I don't even think I've ever had my hands on a Ouija planchette.
I'm making such a shocked face.
You are.
I mean, you could come to my house and I could just hand you a bunch of different ones. The thing is, right, like some of it too is just, I love them from an art perspective because there have been some really beautiful boards designed over the years. Like I love the round boards. I just think they're beautiful. And it's interesting to me. Here's where I really become fixated on them. Not as anything spiritual, but like the fact that a thing that looks like it could be as completely innocuously used, right? It looks like you could teach a kid letters and numbers with it. And yet people are like, but ghosts are talking through it. That juxtaposition is part of the appeal to me, that it is such a fascinating psychology touch point. That's part of why I love them. Also, the designs are beautiful.
Something that is also a funny irony tangentially related to all this is that when I was in high school, my mom went to a very new agey workshop that involved a lot of these same ideas about like accessing parts of your brain that you maybe aren't consciously, and getting communication from non-corporeal, whether it's like people somewhere else or the spirits of people or whatever, which my mom found very helpful to her as she was becoming progressively more disabled and like trying to figure out how to deal with that. And she took me to the same workshop. And it's just funny to me that like a lot of these same concepts that are surrounding Ouija boards were also part of these workshops. But like there was no movies along the lines of The Exorcist that had this new agey workshop as part of it.
Right. Well, and that's also an interesting thing, right? This idea of idiomatic motor response has been used in that way of like, oh, if you can, access those parts of your brain, what you're actually accessing is another entity. And others are like, no, dude, it's a thing you don't even know, but you know it. And that's cool. Like there's like that divide of how people are perceiving the possibilities of that. That's really interesting. I want to go play with my Ouija board, make the cats use it and see what it spells. Oh my gosh, I want to make a cat Ouija board that's got like things like fish and chicken on it, and they can tell me, the spirits can tell me what they want to eat because they're never going to learn to spell.
It could be like those buttons we got for our cats that they still have not figured out how to press in a meaningful way.
Yeah, those are tricky. I feel like those are tricky with cats. I see more success with people using them to teach their dogs to communicate. Cats are kind of like, why don't you learn my language, fool?
Yeah. Yeah, they just have not. I know a couple people that have had really good success with their cats and the buttons, and that just has not been our cats so far.
Different creatures work different ways. In any case, that is I have now had my obsessive Ouija week, and I'm done, theoretically. I hope that it was fun for our listeners. I also hope that you have some fun coming up in the next couple days. If it's your actual weekend and you have time off, I hope that you take care of yourself and that you get to have some rest and relaxation and maybe access parts of your brain that know things you don't think you know. If you don't have that time off, I hope that the things you have to do go smoothly and that everything is as easy as possible and you still maybe find a little bit of relaxation in there. I hope if you are into Halloween that you're enjoying Halloween season. I know I am at a ridiculous level. We will be right back here tomorrow with a classic, and then on Monday you'll get some more fun new stuff.
Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.